Welcome to Executives at the Edge, the podcast from Amplify. Each episode features insights from the top network, cloud, and technology executives, giving you key takeaways to help you grow your revenue and bring solutions to market faster. I'm your host, Pascal Menezes. Join me as we explore thought-provoking perspectives from the leaders and changemakers propelling the AI-powered digital economy forward. I am super excited to have Caroline Chappell. She's the founder of CCsquared. On today's topic, we're going to talk about AI and autonomous networks. It's really about how will AI not just be another technology wave, but can it be a force that really allows agents to work within networks and across networks to accelerate the evolution of NAS and to deliver services for the enterprises at cloud-like speeds. So with that, I would like to welcome Caroline to this show. And Caroline, if you can talk a little bit about yourself and a little about CCsquared, that'd be really appreciated.
Yeah, thanks, Pascal. It's great to be here. And thank you very much for inviting me. My name's Caroline Chappell. I've been an industry analyst in the telecom sector for more years than I care to remember. So yes, I have a long history looking at software technologies and their application in the telecoms area. So I very early picked up on the whole trend to software-defined networks and introduce network virtualization. And I founded CCsquared about a year ago now, really to look at where networks are going in the future. Because obviously they're going to be AI-enabled, they're software-defined, and this, I think, is going to create a really interesting convergence of technology. And particularly, pertinent to our discussion today, when you've got AI agents that can control networks, what does that look like? And what are the substrate for those networks, and what happens to the value chains? So really sort of CCsquared is looking sort of 5 years, even 5 years ahead, 2030s, what's going to happen to the network. So fun times.
You're absolutely right. I mean, I've never seen in my career of 40 years something move so fast than AI. It's baffling. I remember building the internet highways in the 80s, late 80s, and it took a decade. But that was considered fast. But my gosh, in a year, things you blink and AI's changed again. So we're going to talk a little bit about AI and autonomous networks. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about specifically, what is going on with AI, agentic AI and automation, and what are the top of your mind, and what are you seeing?
Yeah, well, what's really interesting, Pascal, is that last week I was at Capacity Europe in London, and what was amazing was that pretty much every panel I went to in that conference mentioned at some point automation and the need for much more autonomous operation of the networks. And what was remarkable is that normally, you get the discussion of automation is kind of confined to specific panels that are going to really look at, just address the people who are interested in managing and operating networks. This was across panels, didn't matter what topic they were on, at some point automation came up in that panel. And what was driving that was really AI. The idea that AI is going to change networking and network services so much that automation was a prerequisite for being able to deal with that. And I thought that was very interesting. Also, from your point of view, the Amplify APIs and standards were seen by that community as absolutely key to that automation and that AI-driven automation. But if I may, I think, we've got to look at the value chain here. I think there's sort of three levels to me of automation. There's the automation of infrastructure, the software defining of infrastructure itself. and the application of AI sort of within that infrastructure. And then above that, I think there's a new layer that's kind of emerging, this kind of idea of a fabric network. How do you aggregate infrastructure and automate across infrastructures? Because the AI services of tomorrow are not going to be footprint constrained. If you look at some of the AI-driven consumer services like the metaverse or, even industrial AI, that they often sort of are services that are needed across operators, across infrastructures. And so the AI automation of that needs to be applied, against the fabric that's software defined across many different infrastructure footprints. And then above that, there's a services layer where the operators will be offering, cloud services or IoT, SIM management services, or whatever the higher value services are on top of the connectivity. So I think it's a fascinating kind of layer cake of different levels in the value chain, each potentially with different AI or AI-driven automation requirements. I don't know if that's how you see it, but
it's a very timely podcast because we are just finalizing our AI strategy, which will launch out at our global NAS event here coming up in November 10th in Dallas, 10th through that whole week. And really, what's really fascinating, I've been talking to every board member and all of our various technology advisory boards and really digging deep in and building out the strategy. And what's fascinating, completely fascinating, is the role of what's going to happen with agents and models and how it's going to abstract all of that tightly integration, that minutia that people had to go through with APIs, all completely abstracted now with agents and models. So I'd love to get into more of that because really what Amplify's been doing is tying together the ecosystems in the what I'll call the legacy world APIs. But we've also built models, which are very important in those APIs because the APIs have to convey information, and those are the models. But now those same models have to become the domain context natural language for an agent to understand what am I talking about. And then MCP becomes the new way of how you communicate as a transport API. So any thoughts about how do you see this whole agentic realm with agents swarming together to do specific autonomous things, they're communicating to models and then they're communicating across the ecosystems? I don't think it's going to be people anymore. It's going to be these agents just doing this stuff. So what's your thoughts?
Yes, and I think that's why I think we're going to get these different layers, and then, as you say, instead of APIs, which are very static, being the interfaces, it's going to be agents, as you say, being the interfaces between those layers and the agents, and I think that the opportunity for in that kind of world for there to be far more dynamic dialing up of network infrastructure to create end-to-end services than we've ever seen before. So I think that really plays into your NAS concept, because everything's got to become a service that is available to an agent. And it'd be the agent that's composing that together, as you say, with the models as the background, with the models as their pool of intelligence, if you like, telling them what to do. But I think it's a fascinating, different way of architecting. And as you say, natural language will then become there will be some sort of way in which the agents will communicate, and we will be able to communicate with them through natural language. So that those will become the abstract interfaces as opposed to APIs and code. I mean, that will all be underneath, but it will be abstracted away.
Yeah, and that's exactly what MCP has done, right? And A2A, and I think it's brilliant, to say, as an agent and model, I'm not going to integrate a proprietary API because you're not going to keep doing that and sending out agents and models and updating them all the time. What you're going to do is say, let me, and this is what MCP's done really well. it said, let me abstract out APIs where I can discover on the APIs, on the MCP server as a client, as an MCP client, I can look to a server and discover what that methods are, which are really the API operations, and which are what they consider tools. And then basically, then what are the resources or the information that flows across that, MCP server, which is really the API. So the great thing is that these agents and servers don't need to be coding anything. They can discover on their own
Yes,
their MCP server, what's available from the API, which is what they call a tool. What are the resources coming across it, the schemas? They can then use that and then basically swarm together to do reasoning, autonomy, to work together, and then basically work with models to say, hey, interpret what this means. And so like there's no coding involved almost. Like agents and models just work together in a very loosely autonomous way. Like, can you kind of like help us understand like how you see this world with agents and models to the legacy world? Do I have it right, or do you see it differently?
Well, I think, I did say at the conference, and I don't know whether this is entirely true or not, but I think it's very exciting because you do see the softwareization of the network and AI coming together with agentic AI. The fact, as you say, that when you softwareize the network, that means that there are APIs available. There's also the sort of all the unstructured information as well. All the wikis and the documentation and so on that's going to be available to these agents. Not just the APIs themselves, but they can consume so much data that a human would actually have to go out and look through a manual or whatever, or indeed put on a wiki, and then it's available for the agent to use as well. All the learning that engineers have about the network that's made available through wikis and so on. But it does beg the question to me as to how do you deal with legacy infrastructure if you don't have that API first strategy, if you haven't exposed your network in that way, and how far do you expose that network in so. And I think different operators are at different levels of maturity in terms of actually making their infrastructure consumable by an agent. And of course, that's down to everything from their data management strategies to whether, in fact, how far they have actually softwareized their networks. So I think what's going to be fascinating to me to watch is when you see there are operators that are already very far along that journey, and others just beginning. And what's that going to do? Is that going to put clear blue water between those that can use agentic AI and really sort of steam ahead, and those whose infrastructure is legacy, stuck in the past, not softwareized?
You bring up a brilliant statement right there, because I've traveled the world, been talking to many members. We have 130 service providers. And, I always take it for granted, because I live in the US, that, the tier ones are very modernized, softwareized, they've automated, but many, many providers have not. And that is really fundamentally, a concern, in my opinion. So, it is really challenging that what happens to these operators have not automated completely and softwareized, and what happened to them, and how do they get into this game, because they have to first go to the first step.
Yeah.
And they haven't gotten there even. So that's challenging.
And I think that's exactly why at Capacity Europe, which was operators from all around the world, a lot of LATAM, a lot of Asian operators there, a lot of Middle Eastern operators, very big Middle Eastern contingent. So not just the European operators. I think that's why automation was being brought up in every single panel that I listened to, because there's almost like this light bulb moment going off around the world that in order to play in this AI enabled world of the future, you have to have that. You have to be softwareized. You have to be software defined. Of course, not everything needs to run in a cloud native network, but you do at least have to have those APIs. You do at least have to have the tools, as you mentioned, the tools that will be available to the agents, because as you say, if agents are negotiating with other agents and everything's happening, electronically, digitally, across between operators, and indeed between operators and their customers, then if you just won't have access to that. You won't even be considered for providing services unless you have that softwareization underneath.
I cannot agree with you more than I've been, and people have said, you know what, it's cheaper to, and I've actually heard this, it's cheaper to use people that I pay very little, because, parts of the world, labor is very cheap, and I will use them to provision my network, and I'll use them to take orders. So I'm like, I walk away from them like, are you kidding me? Like, where have you been living? And so now this is going to completely change the game, because in an AI world, first of all, we're seeing bandwidth through the roof. Wavelengths, carrier Ethernet has gotten a whole nother uplift just for the fact of data center interconnect for smaller models, but wavelengths for foundational models to synchronize the models across the planet, and to keep them synchronized, it takes a lot of bandwidth. And so there's a bandwidth drive right now, fiber, wavelengths, carrier Ethernet, all of this, and even models have to connect to peripherals and cameras all over and sensors, and so the Amplify NAS, what we're doing NAS for AI is all about that. Is how do you provide all that connectivity? But we have four major themes in our strategy. One is the transport, which I described. Second is automation, which is what we're talking about. But the third is the cybersecurity. What will happen when the world is all gone AI? And how does cybersecurity play into this? How will SASE play into it? How will zero trust play into it? And now the most important thing is, how does agents communicate to each other, authenticate, authorize, and have auditing of what they do? And the guardrails have to be in place, especially when you're going across autonomies, across the ecosystem. That's very complex. And any thoughts here?
Well, and that's why I think, we're at the very beginning of agentic AI, and you're beginning to see some pushback from the market, aren't you? A lot of the sort of big guns in the AI world coming out saying, agentic AI. But, this always happens with new technologies. Unless you start, I saw it, the whole sort of softwareization of the network, the whole of NFV, and you think, well, it's taken so long for that to come through. It's a decade's worth of work, really. As you say, things are happening quickly. So I think actually this will be accelerated with AI, because you're going to get AI that's going to be self-improving and therefore could be a lot quicker in terms of improvement. But we have to remember that we're at the very beginning of this whole agentic AI journey, and there are a lot of things to figure out in it. And I think it, again, as you say, this authentication between agents, MCP's a start, but it's nowhere near a complete framework really yet for agents. And models themselves, I mean, the models, we're talking about LLMs, but now we've got TRMs and SLMs, and the models have got LLMs have got shortcomings, so we know that they've got to be other things that they're supported by in order for deterministic environments like networks. So I think there's a huge amount here of learning to do and things to put in place, and it's still very early days.
And I think also what we're also seeing is sovereign AI. I mean, every country now has, look, we've done analysis. I mean, it's going to be close to $15 trillion economy or more. It's a massive amount of money. And every country is seeing this as I have to have an AI infrastructure. And if I don't have an AI infrastructure for my country, I'm not going to be relevant in the new world because, we're just, we're going to go to AGI and then ASI. And so if you're not, as a country, plugged in and making AI happen, you're going to be left behind in a modernized society where, you're basically, your GDP is going to be very predicated on AI. So sovereign AI has come in. Governments are funding for the first time telcos to say, help me with the sovereign AI. You guys own the bandwidth. You guys own the fiber, the toll bridges for AI. So now let's build big data centers and AI factories. But that will naturally push out. They have the radio access networks, the edges. How do I make the sovereign AI feed to further out? Now that all has to be fully automated. And so I think, and I'd love to hear your thoughts to conclude. When I came into this industry in 84, I graduated, I was coming from X25 and BiSync. And then, I saw this thing IP, and that was the IP protocol, and it was OSI versus IP. And then all of a sudden, the universities were working with IP, and then, then all of a sudden the internet showed up, and there was no web or anything. It was all FTP and Telnet and all that. And then all of a sudden, it just, over the decades, but this was decades. I'm seeing AI change in a year at massive speeds I've never seen in my lifetime. Do you have any thoughts about this? How will operators, if they don't automate and don't even have automation, get to an AI game?
Yeah, I think that's fundamental, and I think that to me actually is the least disruptive application of AI that the industry is going to see. Absolutely, AI needs to be brought into automation and help operators in any way that they can to get themselves automated in order to get themselves ready for this future. Because, as I say, I think the more disruptive impact of AI is the fact that AI, and part of the reason it's developing so quickly is because AI can code itself. AI is coding AI. The models are improving. That the whole sort of AI, the whole sort of self-improvement of these models is progressing at a phenomenal speed. So, with that in mind, people who have the network knowledge, the knowledge of networking, and the knowledge of software, I think you're going to see some very interesting new networks appear. As I say, fabric networks, software-defined networks that can run across infrastructures. And those, I think, are going to be quite disruptive, particularly for operators' enterprise businesses, if they don't have that basic automation in place. And I think you're already seeing some really interesting sort of NAS offers that are agent enabled already in the market, and that are setting the kind of standard for that. And then above that, I think the most disruptive thing, and I believe this is what's going to come in the next decade, and part of the reason I set up CCsquared was because I think you're going to get self-improving AI. You can call it AGI if you want, but it is self-improving AI that is going to actually go beyond what we can imagine as humans at the moment, what we can conceptualize as humans at the moment, and actually, look at what we're doing as humans and say, why are you building networks like that? Why is that the protocol? Why don't you do it this way? And I think, overnight we could, the world could change very suddenly. And I think there are other things on the horizon, even like neuromorphic computing and so on, that we might be writing off at the moment as too far ahead. But once AI becomes self-improving, I think that momentum that you're talking about, Pascal, could accelerate even further. And that could be very, very disruptive. So the very least that operators should be doing at the moment is that basic level of automation.
That is, you're spot on. And I've been a decade the CTO of Amplifier, formerly MEF. And it's like pulling teeth to get people to automate and put APIs in that we've been developing over 10 years. It was like stunning. Like, how could you not understand how critical that is? And now the AI world is coming, as you said. And just to recap and end this, I was up till 2 a.m. last night, and all I did was just took our documentation, which our Carrier Ethernet documentation, and I use Carrier Ethernet as one source of our NAS. I took our Carrier Ethernet documentation. I took our APIs, which we have. I took our payloads, which are the schemas for Carrier Ethernet, and I just shoved them into Chat GPT and said, I want a domain-specific language for Carrier Ethernet that I can give to agents and models that they can understand from an ontology, context, construct point of view. And it generated that for me in about 30 minutes. And now I have that thing to give to all our members to say, here, you give this to your agents and your models, and it'll understand it. You don't have to weed through all of that stuff. I've just generated it for you, right? Now, that's crazy.
It is crazy. Yep.
Like in the past, it would take me developers and people to go and to weed through that to get to that level. But to generate a domain-specific language for a Carrier Ethernet that agents can understand, taking all our work over 10 years and do that literally in 30 minutes is unbelievable. That's the power of AI.
Yeah, absolutely.
So do you have any closing thoughts before we end here, Caroline?
Well, I think just to reiterate really that we're at the very beginning of this agentic AI journey, but I think operators should not be put off, but should not at all hold back in terms of, oh gosh, this is too difficult, it's immature, there's this problem and that problem. The problems are huge, but they've got to get in and get their hands dirty and get involved with it. And really very much to what we've just discussed, if you are not softwareizing, if you're not even on the starting blocks, you could be disintermediated far more quickly than you think.
Yeah, brilliantly said. And for all our listeners, if you really want to get involved, join Amplify. We are absolutely going down this path rapidly. We spent a decade on the APIs and automation. Now we're going to make it all AI ready and give all the assets to make yourself AI ready. So that's our goal. That's our strategy, and it will be announced, and I'll deliver my keynote in our Global NAS event in November in Dallas. So stay tuned for that. And with that, I want to thank you, Caroline. What a fascinating episode.
Thank you, Pascal.
Thank you for listening to Executives at the Edge, brought to you by Amplify. Be sure to follow, share, and leave a review. Catch every episode on your favorite platform or visit us at amplify.net.